tonight's session will explore important questions and issues, including the best approach to innovation and competition and partnership, and then the implications for the future of fully autonomous vehicles in Europe, and why a flexible approach is so important. So to discuss the road to autonomous vehicles from Hogan Lovells, I'm delighted to welcome Patrick Ayed, Global Lead in Mobility and Transportation at Hogan Lovells, Volker Hartmann, Global VP of Legal and Government Affairs at Volkswagen, and Sebastian Polly, Industry Sector Co-Head, Automotive, Hogan Lovells as well. Please give a big round of applause.
So, thanks for being back again after the lunch break. I wanted to have a Rhabarberschorle. You know what is Rhabarberschorle? No, it's the English word. But then I took this one because I thought it's nicer with my sauce. And I have to send an apology because this morning I was talking about diversity. We will do better next year if we are here again. At least I'm half Egyptian, but otherwise I think. Well, anyway. Let my hair grow, okay? No, seriously, it's an important topic. So we will do better. We want to talk about the road to autonomous vehicles today, and particularly also the legal framework and what is needed actually to have them on the road, not just for testing, but in terms of serious deployment. But I want to start with a Paul question, so to say. The big question, when will we have autonomous vehicles on the road? And I mean really commercialized, not just testing. And I give you, 3 or 4 choices, so I say, just wait, this year, next year, 2025, 2023, 30, never. Too many choices maybe. This year. Oh, our curator. Very nice. Okay. Next year. Ross, the CEO of Autonomy, and another person. Very good. Okay, 2. And the others, like 2025? A bit more. He's hesitant. 2030? Okay, that's the majority. Although, never? Hey, not so pessimistic. Well, it's okay, it's fair, it's okay.
Ask him where it works. That's his employer now.
Yeah. No, we don't want to get into the details. So the majority said, I think 2030, right? That's amazing. Okay, so we'll try to change that maybe today. To me also, and I guess we share this view, it's probably more important where we will have them, and not so much, when, but we'll get into this. And now the next question would be, why not? Why will we not have them earlier than 2030? What do you think is the biggest obstacle to deploying autonomous vehicles on the roads? And we have to come up with some choices here. So the first would be technical challenges, the technology is not ready. The second would be the legal framework. The third would be maybe consumer perception, because the consumers don't want that. And the fourth could be, although it is probably a bit related, the political environment, some, I don't know, whatever reasons. So, I have to remind myself what I said. Technology. The technology is not yet ready. Who thinks that? 1, 2, 3 people, 4 people. No, probably more. Okay, 5. Second was, I think, the legal framework. Oh, we will surprise you today. Okay. The third was consumer perception and acceptance. You're all ready? There's service where people say they are afraid, driving around with an autonomous vehicle, but you seem to, we're in Berlin, open, innovative, that makes sense. And the fourth was, I think, the political discussion challenges, like it takes too long or whatever. So the top answer by far is the legal framework. That's why we're here today. Quite interesting. I have to say, and that's the bad news, The legal framework is very complex when it comes to autonomous vehicles because we have various levels. Actually, I would say 4. There are regulations on a UN, United Nations level regarding road traffic safety and also technical requirements of vehicles. And so they, of course, do not yet fully reflect the fact that there are also autonomous vehicles out there. There are some changes that have been introduced already a couple of years ago, and there are 2 working groups who are further developing these regulations so that they fully basically consider autonomous vehicles, but this still takes some time. However, the working groups also acknowledge that domestically that there are certain developments on the legal side, and so there are certain opportunities, possibilities to also regulate something maybe nationally. But when it comes to Europe, we have the second level, so to say, which is the European level. When it comes to vehicles, we have a European type approval system, so every vehicle in Europe needs an EU type approval, and this is why we also have a regulation on an EU level. And then, of course, on the third level, we have the national legislation, so German laws, French laws on traffic safety on cars or whatsoever. But of course, there is harmonization, a certain degree of harmonization on the EU level. And there is actually, for autonomous vehicles in particular, but also transportation services, a 4th level, which is the more municipal level. So all the discussions around, for example, Uber and the cities is on a municipal level. And we will also have that, we will get into this when it comes to autonomous vehicles, because what is very important for autonomous vehicles is the ODD, the operational design domain, and that will be something that will need to be approved also on a municipal level. At least this is the idea that the legislator has in mind, and I think rightfully so. And I can tell you that the interaction between all these levels is super complex legally, and that's true. But the good news, I think, Europe is really taking the lead and is the most advanced region, so to say, when it comes to regulating autonomous vehicles in serious deployment. We have France 2 years ago, they developed a law specifically for people mover systems, and it is basically ready. We have Germany, which has now, they started in 2017, but it was not level 4 like the fully autonomous, as people say, vehicles, so we don't need a driver to intervene. So that was, they started with level 3 basically, and level 2 in 2017, I think. And now, potentially on the 20th of May, we will have like the final legal act, including the German ordinance for autonomous vehicles, level 4 technology in Germany. And no limitation whatsoever, not just people mover, but like every car. Germany went ahead together with France. There is also something, of course, developments in the UK, but they are not part of the EU yet now, which of course gives them an advantage here. But the thing is now that the EU has now introduced a draft regulation for ADS, automated driving systems. And now the big discussion is to what extent this may conflict with the national laws that are already in place or will come into force in a couple of days, as it is the case in Germany. Because the EU at the moment is hesitant to take, the big step. They want to limit this law to small series, which would mean, and interpretation is still under discussion, but which would mean 250 vehicles per member state, if you want to do it nationally, or up to 1,500 vehicles just in one member state if you want to regulate it on the EU level. And that's a discussion that is currently taking place, because just to illustrate, you have a vehicle in Germany and you want that vehicle to drive also cross-border to France, and for this you clearly need an EU type approval. Now the big discussion currently is whether, leaving aside what Europe does, whether a country like Germany or France could then decide on its own that they introduce these vehicles, not just 250 or 1,500 vehicles, but let's say 20,000 vehicles or whatsoever. And there is currently a legal discussion whether a member state is allowed to do this if the EU says that we will only introduce small series ADS in the markets. But then, and that's the final point, the EU is certainly also working on the next step, which would be like, unlimited series for autonomous vehicles. They have set a target date now for 2024 to have that regulated. So my point is, from an EU perspective, we will have the legislative framework ready for autonomous vehicles in small series this year, and potentially without limitation in 2024. Germany will have its laws ready this year for autonomous vehicles, and now the discussion is whether they can introduce it beyond the 250 or, if it's just one country, 1,500 vehicles. So the regulatory framework is there. It is there this year. It's no longer an obstacle for autonomous vehicles. That is important to note. Let me know if you disagree. I hope not, otherwise I'll fail on whatever I do here. Now, there is another discussion, and I'll bring my co-panelists here into play shortly. We wrote a white paper on autonomous vehicles, the road to autonomous vehicles, simply because we felt that the discussion was not going in the right direction. There is a discussion about there was a discussion about the manufacturer and the vehicle manufacturer. So the point was, who is introducing these vehicles? I mean, if you listen to what public sources say, the large OEMs, and you have a lot of insight here, they are not really planning introducing these vehicles in next year or this year. It still takes some time for the big manufacturers. They have other issues. They have a semiconductor crisis. They have battery technology that they need to purchase, which is very expensive and complex for electrification. Of course, they are still looking into autonomous vehicles, and they will introduce autonomous vehicles, but it's maybe not at the moment their top priority. So they seem to have a little bit more time, but there are other players like ADS developers, new operators, mobility service providers who want to introduce or who may want to introduce this technology quicker. Just to give you an example, that was announced at the IAA Mobility in Germany, in Munich last year in September. Mobileye has announced a partnership with Sixt to introduce autonomous vehicles in Germany, actually Munich region, this year. So you see, some people want to be on the market somewhat quicker, and the point is just, who is the one who then takes responsibility, assumes responsibility for these vehicles? Is it the car manufacturer, or is it the one, like the ADS developer, who puts the ADS technology on top, or is it the operator? And that is also something that needs to be worked out from a legal perspective. We just thought that we need to leave the legislation open to this question so that everyone can basically be a manufacturer of these vehicles, provided that this company assumes responsibility for the safety of the vehicles and also proves that the vehicles are safe, and also, of course, takes regulatory responsibility. So that was one thing that we also thought would be important, and the legislator indeed now moved into this direction and made some clarifications in the law. Now, let me maybe introduce also once again our two co-panelists here, and starting obviously with Volker. You have a very impressive history in terms of the companies that you have seen. Starting, I don't know if you started there, but Audi, and then Daimler, AID, which is now, which was integrated into Argo AI, Caveat, and now Way. Can you tell us a little bit the stages? Because it's also interesting, it's not just legal, and I think that's the most important point of your career.
Yeah, so, well, I had this huge imprint of traditional automotive industry in my professional career. That's why I started at Audi in the legal department and did several things, but I would describe myself as a product lawyer still, because I started out in the product liability department. Later on, some engineer came into my room, and this was an engineer working on autonomous driving, and this was the start of this autonomous driving history. Yeah, and then I ended up with leading the legal team for autonomous driving at Audi, then did the same at Daimler, then went to AID, which was the corporate startup within Volkswagen for L4, autonomous driving, when Argo Deal came in. And now the most interesting, or one of the most interesting experiences I made is when I then joined Carriot, I went into the technical development. So I didn't work as a traditional lawyer in the law firm, in the legal department, but went into the technical development and really, I led the quality department for autonomous driving and driver assistance systems, and really went into detail of some of the technical standards and the technical management processes we as lawyers usually counsel, right? And if we come too close to the surface, we usually again give some speed and go away from these technical details, and I really did that, and it's super interesting to see how this interacts and how we then bring legal compliance, regulatory compliance into products in the end. Yeah, you have to translate this into technical design at the end of the day. Yeah, and this is what I did. And now at Way, I'm leading the legal department and governmental affairs, which is 360 degrees again. But we are a small company still, startup here. We built autonomous driving and teleoperated driving, or teledriving, how we call it. So here I do everything, literally.
And tell us a bit more about exactly what you just said. Tele-driving, you said, teleoperating, of course, but teledriving, it's briefer, I guess, and autonomous driving, because it's not the same. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So actually, no, it's not the same. Yeah, some of you might know the SAE standardization, the taxonomy, the automation levels, and teledriving, teleoperated driving is essentially human driving. So it's not L3, L4, L5 automation. You have a human driver controlling the vehicle, but the human driver is dislocated. So it's not in the vehicle, but somewhere. So we have a test fleet running around Berlin, and here in this building, we have our teledrive stations, we call this, where you have the pilots, the drivers, sitting and controlling remotely these vehicles, right? So this is the big difference, also legally and regulatorily. If we speak of AVs, we always have a computer, a robot on four wheels. With teledriving, this is traditional driving, but a dislocated driver. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get back to the point about teleoperation and autonomous driving, I think, in another context. Sebastian, global co-head automotive, a product liability, safety, compliance expert. You're dealing with AI also more generally, I think, and then also specifically, of course, autonomous driving. Just some opening words from your side, and maybe also specifically on what I said about the law, because many people think that we need not just a regulatory framework, which I was just talking about, but also new liability laws. Do we have them? Can we expect them? Do we need them at all?
Oh, sorry. Someone just said two of these, right?
So, hi everybody, I'm Sebastian. To your point, Patrick, some words to begin with. Like Patrick said, I come from a liability safety perspective, so we help companies to bring their product on the market, but by doing that we also try to think things through to the end in case something goes sideways. There can be accidents, there can be fatalities, and one of the things I try to raise awareness is when a lot of those hands went up and we're talking about is there a legal barrier, a legal obstacle, will this prevent us? I'm with Patrick and Volker here that the legal framework shouldn't be the barrier. My team and I, we are, I guess, big fans, both of traditional AI, also teledriving. We believe in the technology. We are yes-sayers, not naysayers. One thing I want to raise awareness particularly is, one thing is the market entry requirements. Patrick rightfully said, you type approvals to enter into the market. There will be UNECE rules, there might be national rules, depending on the member state you're in. Those are market entry requirements, but something that a lot of people are sometimes neglecting a little bit is the fact that the product still needs to be safe, regardless of the minimum market entry requirements. And the product is typically safe when it meets reasonable safety expectations. So what does that mean? But what I'm trying to say is there's one thing where you say, look, we're there now, we have a legal framework, it is legal to place certain things on the market. Those are minimum market entry requirements that can be enough, but on the other hand, it's also a question, when does the product meet the reasonable safety expectation? Do we believe in the product, do we believe in the technology, and if we believe in it in terms of we have the right processes, we have the right documentation, the right mindset, maybe even the right evidence. Like I said, I mean, I'm typically one of those guys defending products, and I've been defending products all my life, and you can make my life extremely easier if you have good evidence. That helps me to convince courts, to convince technical experts. So what I'm trying to say is it's one thing where you can say, look, I have a type approval. Well, that's not bad, but you need that to enter the market. Do you have more than a type approval? Do you have test data? Do you have evidence? Do you have processes? And the right mindset? And I think that's something I'd love to start with, just to raise awareness. The second point to Patrick's question, we do have, of course, liability regimes. I personally take the view that those regimes that are in place right now are balanced, they are fair, they are effective. Yes, of course we have liability regimes, and if we place unsafe products, defective products on the market, yes, then somebody might be liable for that. And don't get me wrong, I'm also a consumer, I'm also a driver, I'm also using products. I mean, there's probably nothing wrong to say you have a good liability regime. Do we need others, stricter ones? I think those that we are having right now are tested, they've proven themselves, they're good. But to your second point, Patrick, I believe, and we see this, there are currently public consultations about strict product liability on AIs, holder liability on AIs, a lot of new concepts. Based on what I see so far, I don't believe we need them, but there's a fair chance that we'll get them. And for different reasons, for public pressure, political pressure, maybe commodity, you name it. I think we need to closely monitor, but there's a fair chance that we'll see new and different liability regimes in the future, particularly linked to AI, AVs, etc.
And just to clarify, when you speak about strict liability, that would mean without any fault requirement like negligence or whatsoever. It's just you're liable because the system is defective, and that's it. And that is something that the EU is currently planning on the AI side, so more generally, but they're using autonomous vehicles as one of the examples there.
So
One of the, and I'm a dog person, and I've seen a couple of dogs here, and I had a very pleasant experience with a nice dog during lunch, like some of you might have had. Why am I saying dog now? And one of the concepts, it's just one that, as an example, the EU is currently thinking about is a kind of holder liability for AI. So those of you who have dogs should know what a holder liability means. It's your dog. If it bites somebody, you're liable. There is no defense in the world where you can say, I won't pay. It's your dog. If it bites somebody, you're liable. You can't say, look, I wasn't negligent and I trained the dog, or it's the dog, it's not me. For God's sake, it's your dog, you're the holder. If it bites somebody, you're liable. And people think about the same concept. It's just an example for AI. If it's your AI, if you're using it, if it bites somebody, it's your problem, you're liable. If you want to get rid of the problem, insure your AI. It's an interesting concept. It just shows where we're going with it. In terms of all those concepts are on the table, public consultations, we make up our minds about it. It just shows the idea of a strict liability or holder liability with concepts that people come up with. I'm not sure that we need it. I'm actually not seeing it. But the idea, the brainchild that is currently being developed, that's interesting, and that's something we're part of.
Volker, at the beginning, we were talking about, when will we have autonomous vehicles, and then, I was saying maybe the question is where, and it also relates to the point of the different levels, like L2, L3, L4. There are companies that go to L4 through L2 and L3. There are companies who go right after L4, and again, L4 would mean that you don't need any intervention from a human here. To me, this is also the question about the interaction between a human and a driver. And I personally don't quite believe in this interaction. I think level 3 actually, to me, is the most problematic case.
You mean interaction between human and machine?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
a
a human
driver.
driver.
That's wrong.
Yeah.
A human driver and a machine. this interaction. I don't believe in that, which is also why I think level 3 is probably the most problematic case. Give us your view on this, and also how it relates to the whole teledriving, idea and discussion.
Okay, so different aspects. As I said, I'm also a product liability guy. So looking at this, of course, human-machine interaction and interfaces is always somehow problematic or very interesting from our legal point of view, right? It's mostly not trivial, it's complicated in detail, and therefore I would also say, and I counseled some of the vehicle projects in the L3 space, this is complex. It's challenging to do things really right. You need a good HMI concept, you need clarity, so that the person in the car really understands when do I have control, when can I relax, when is the system in control, what is the takeover, what is the time frame, what is happening next, etc. Right? So this is huge, and it necessarily doesn't have much to do with autonomous driving. It's really the user concept. Now, but what I wanted to say, it doesn't end with L3. Also, an L4 vehicle has a human-machine interaction as long as within the operational design domain, ODD, you have a mixed traffic situation. I call it a mixed traffic situation because out there are humans in vehicles, on bicycles, pedestrians, on horses, whatsoever. We are in Berlin, I don't know, somebody's riding a giraffe, I don't know. Yeah, so you have funny things happening, and this is happening controlled by humans, and then you have a robot, a software-controlled machine interacting with this environment. And this is also very interesting. It's similar, by the way, but it's external. It's not in the vehicle, but it's an external HMI in the end. So you also have questions from a legal perspective. How does this communicate? Right? If we come with two cars to a crossroads and he's like blinking at me like he's doing, and he's looking at me, I know, okay, I can drive through. Even though probably he would have the right to drive, right? But he's communicating with me. If I would be a robot, I would say, stupid human, what are you doing? Right? I mean, the robot doesn't understand it. And it's super difficult to bring algorithms to a level where they really natively understand and understand human behavior and act and interact in a natural way. This is essentially what I believe, and I'm just a poor little lawyer, right? I mean, I'm not claiming to be an engineer or a software guy, but what I understand, this is the reason why players like Waymo, Cruise, and others with literally unlimited money and resources still are not doing this on a large scale, because it's freaking complex, right? And what was your last? The last aspect was teledriving. Yeah, well, now teledriving. Thanks for that one. The easy answer is this is the bridge. This is the bridging technology between robots and human driving, because you have. Now I'm saying it's the same. It's not the same driving situation. I did that. Me and my team, some of them are senior. We did teledrive. It's definitely a different way to drive a vehicle compared to drive it from. Sitting in the vehicle and driving it behind the steering wheel. But it's comparable in many dimensions of human perception and, more importantly, human interpretation and decision making. Because human intelligence, and this is the big difference I see, by the way, and I also find this AI discussion a bit artificial, to make a joke out of it. Really, what we overlook is the big difference is human intelligence works completely differently than artificial intelligence. The fact that we use intelligence in this term is not logic. And what we do always, if we are on a road traffic situation or whatsoever we do, our brain calculates from a contextual dimension. So we did have experiences stored in our brain. We see many things, but we also sense many things going on around us. You don't really consciously consciously understand, but your brain does process these impressions. And it's super complex to rebuild this in a machine with artificial intelligence based on sensors, which are the ears, the nose, and the eyes of the machine. So we should really rather treat this as two different things, and then make a balance, a trade-off, literally, as a society, also with the legal framework, whether we think that robotics generally brings advantages to society, to economy, in total, yes or no, and then let's do it. Right? That will be my approach.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is also why, you know, my question, when will we have autonomous vehicles, was probably not fair, because it really depends on where. So if you ask me, will we have autonomous vehicles on a dedicated lane on a highway, we can have that today. This is not a problem, it's not that complex. But if you ask me whether we will, or when we will have autonomous vehicles in Hanoi, I'm not quite sure if I will survive that. Because, you know, driving around in Hanoi with an autonomous vehicles, I cannot imagine this at this stage.
Yeah. So two simple thoughts on that. Also, I believe from a technical and from a legal standpoint, ODD matters, period. Infrastructure matters, period. And that's it.
And that also means, we're here at the City Summit, Berlin City Summit, urban mobility, it's a very complex case, of course, for autonomous vehicles. In particular also, as you said, in a city like this, where you have like strange animals on the roads, what I just learned. So I want to, before I get back to maybe also the safety aspect, do you want to add something? Yeah, one point to Volker also, when you introduce new technology, and you've seen that from a quality perspective, safety perspective, tell me a little bit about standardization and how important that is, because this is also the connection to the legal side, I think, and then we'll talk about some of this also in the context of safety and liability.
Yeah, okay, so my thoughts on it is, from a practical perspective, what you do as a lawyer counseling such a project is you ask yourselves, what Sebastian said, the product has to be reasonably safe. Now, what is reasonably safe? I mean, every engineer is freaking out if I come up with this reasonable degree of safety. What is it? Well, you can make some, I mean, this is like, what people have to understand, law is a science of language. Right? We are making these definitions which need other definitions to be defined, and then you have another definition defining this definition because we want to build a house in the end or whatsoever. This is our profession, to really explain what these words mean. Now, reasonable degree of safety often comes down to what we call state of the art. Now, what is state of the art? This is another chiffre or definition which needs to be defined. And in practice, what happens is that the judge, in doubt, he or she never has seen an autonomous vehicle or whatsoever, so the person has no clue, but in the role as a judge, he has to make a judgment. So he looks or she looks into getting some help from technical experts or whatsoever. And what technical standards are, legally speaking, they are important indicators. Important indicators, because this helpless judge can't decide whether you've developed this correctly or not, but he can ask, well, I heard about ISO 26262. There's something. Did you comply with that in your development processes, and can you prove that? This is something I can understand as a judge. Right? And this is the importance, and this is also why I say probably it's more important if we look into this stupid AI discussion or robotics coming onto the market. It's more important looking at the standardization level than on the liability framework, because the instruments we have in place, they still work from a liability standpoint. The important thing is we have to be able to really translate into technology and then back into legalese what this means, and therefore you need the standards. And we do see some what we call new land, right? So you don't have a standard, you don't have a comparison, you don't have a competitor field who's doing this and that, you don't have patents in some spaces, literally nothing. And that's something which is making, especially us Europeans, making feel very uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, and picking up that point on particularly safety and standards, according to the new law, and particularly also to the German law, which by the way also, when Germany, was working on that law, of course the EU has a close look at this law, and they have also taken over some of these elements for the EU law. In fact, of course, Germany is part of the EU law development. And the way it works now, or will work, is that you have, of course, the type approval for the car. You have a special type approval, I call it that way, for the ADS, for the automated driving system. That needs a special approval. And then you have even an approval of the ODD. It's all about ODD. And so you have different layers of approval. Now I'm wondering, how do I prove that my autonomous vehicle or ADS is safe? How do I do that? Open question.
So I'll give it a shot, and it's like Volker said, it's uncharted territory. This is a new country. This is cutting edge technology. It'll probably take years over years before we have proper case law. And just because there's one ruling from one judge somewhere, which we might have soon, it doesn't mean that we have developed experience how courts will do this. But here's my best guess, and a lot of what we expect from our engineers and the people in development, that's also what they expect from their lawyers. They expect best guesses, an honest opinion, not a best case scenario, not a worst case scenario. So here is what I'm seeing. It's exactly what Volker and Patrick said. So the type approval level, that's one thing. And a type approval, again, is a strong indication where you need to convince technical services to get your test reports, where you need to convince type approval authorities to issue the type approval. That is a very important piece of the puzzle. You have technical standards, you develop new technical standards. That's again a strong indication that you're state of the art. But at the end, it often boils down in a courtroom to very simple questions. You've got a judge there. He or she is not a technical expert. They either make up their mind with the ways they have, I'll talk about that in a second, or they use technical experts. Those can be very good technical experts or not. So it's probably not the worst to have good technical experts at your side as well. But again, it boils down to a point that, and I hope I'm not boring you now, but this is a legal issue, is the courts cannot ask a technical expert a legal question. So when the law says the car needs to be safe, the judge will not ask the expert, is the car safe? If the law says if the vehicle is defective, you're liable, the court cannot ask the technical expert, is the vehicle defective? But the vehicle needs to comply with whatever the court thinks. It's an art of words. What the court thinks makes a vehicle defective or makes a vehicle safe. So the court will ask other questions like, does this vehicle comply with all applicable technical standards? Or, and you'd be surprised, but I heard those questions, would you yourself put yourself in this car and feel safe? Would you put your family in the back seat? Those are typical questions during an oral hearing where you ask somebody, would you actually drive this? Would you put your family in there? And if an expert's like, hell yeah, no problem, this is safe, it gives a judge a completely different feeling compared to say, well, actually, looking at all the data I have here, no, I think this is a death trap, I would never put my family in there. And the judge is like, oh, okay, I hear you. And so those are often the things we're seeing. And on top of it, and I'm just telling you guys what my best guesses are, don't underestimate defense strategies. So there will be incidents, will be accidents. I mean, it's unavoidable. It doesn't mean that the technology is unsafe. Like Volker said, human-machine interaction, humans will probably crash into probably also tailor-operated vehicles. There is no difference. There will be accidents. Doesn't mean that your driver did something wrong. It's just like somebody else decided to crash into the car, and it will happen to AVs as well. What's our defense strategy, our defense story, and do we believe in this story? When I say story, I'm not meaning fairy tale. It's not like we're telling fairy tales. It's a proper, sophisticated defense story based on proper processes, proper documentation, and also in line of what the teams and their mindset says. And that in my view is the key to overcome this market entry barrier. The regulatory framework that Patrick rightfully outlined, and on top of that, making sure that process and documentation works. And then it's a bright future, I'd say.
Can I add?
Yeah, sure.
Because you said that with the processes. What is important to understand, I think, what I learned so far, it's a tough challenge to develop software correctly or software-controlled mechanical devices correctly. Why? And because also in the standardization world, you don't always have standardization which gives you one specific threshold or like provides you with the architectural design of this or that. But rather what these standards do is provide you with process models. It's about process models, right? So product safety is about following the correct, or being able to prove that I followed a correct development process to exclude what might have happened or what might have gone wrong. And that's an important difference, and that leads you directly, and it's super important for us as an in-house legal department, for example, it leads you directly to the mindset of people and to the culture. Because you cannot say I followed the process if you didn't follow the process. You will fail to prove that, right? And you only can do it if you really do it, and it will come up if you didn't, if you cheated, if you took a shortcut, right? So this is not trivial. This is really then about the genes and the way you do your business.
I just wanted to add while you were talking. I had a call with a journalist just before this session. She's doing some research in terms of investments into autonomous vehicles and whatsoever, and she was actually asking me whether I think we should have, if it comes to the ODD and introducing autonomous vehicles regionally, she was asking whether I thought we should have a vote by the public on whether or not there should be autonomous vehicles in that region. And I said, well, wait a minute, did we have a vote when we were introducing airplanes also? I mean, why would we have that? I mean, it's all about consumer perception, that's right. But I think the industry, together with the government and the regulators and the authorities eventually, are responsible to present something to the public that is eventually safe. And that's all we need. And then, if that is the case, we need to go out and say, that's fine, we can use it, and then we introduce it. But we should not have a vote in Berlin whether or not to use autonomous vehicles. So it was interesting to think about that. Now, you said about the complexity, particularly also in an urban environment. We talked a little bit about this when we prepared about the technology open interpretation of the laws, so traffic laws. And can you give us some examples? Because this will probably give people a better idea on what the challenges also technically are when it comes to this technology.
Yeah, so I often say, this is one of my favorite sentences, that you have to translate the law into technology, and then you have to validate if you really, with your technological design setup, fulfill the law. But what does that mean? And it can lead to really interesting, funny, and frustrating discussions. Because, as I said earlier, we have a legal regime which is originally was made to apply for humans, or to humans. Was made by humans for humans. And if you apply that to a machine, especially with regards to road traffic rules, which we call also behavioral law, because it regulates the behavior of the road traffic participants, right? This is interesting, because you will fail to, for example, technically translate the look over the shoulder if you do a lane change into an AV. It simply doesn't make sense, right? So you have to think of a technical way how you bypass this and you reach a comparable safe behavior of the vehicle. So this is what we would argue also from a, legal product law standpoint. But there are other funny aspects, like, for example, if something happens and you have a crash or your vehicle breaks down, there's an obligation in German Road Traffic Act, StVO, to put a warning triangle, a Warndreieck on the road, right? And in a safe distance, whatever that means, or a reasonably safe distance, so that you warn other road participants. Now, if you have an AV or also with a teleoperated vehicle, there can be a situation where there is no person, no human being in the vehicle. What do you do? And I had funny discussions, and I don't think that authorities are completely reluctant. They also have creative ideas, but in the end we have the law. And it's questionable if creative ideas work under the law, right? And you can think of a lot of technical solutions which might appear very, very effective, might be probably even better than a human being putting a warning triangle in a dense traffic situation than some other vehicle overruns this person. I mean, this makes it even worse, right? But you can think of, I don't know, a technology where you display in the back sheet, what's the name of the Rückscheibe? Not front shield, but yeah. Rear screen. Thank you. You can display, for example, a virtual picture of the warning triangle, which would be super effective, probably. Or you can project some picture on the road, or you can, this is a super funny idea, in digital Germany, right, 2022, you can do this just by swarm intelligence and send emergency messages to all other road participants where you know they will come across this particular place because you track them with your Google Maps anyways all the time, right? But in the end, this is not in the law, it's not written there. So it's a problem, it's a hurdle, and we have to come over it. And this is what we mean if we address technology openness, I guess, in regulatory frameworks, right?
Which was also part of what we advocated in our white paper. I think that's an important point, and it's also, I mean, I'm still wondering how do we do that if there's an autonomous vehicle and a human driver, they meet at the crossing, and there are situations where you could just drive, but you just make a sign that the other vehicle should go ahead, because it's better for this particular situation. The autonomous vehicle will do nothing, it will just stop. So I think there are still some technical challenges that we need to resolve, which is why it is so complex, which is why you said that companies are maybe not yet there, but others will want to go ahead. Now we have a couple of more minutes. I want to finish at least from our end with some good news, and then maybe there will be one or the other question or contribution whatsoever. Sebastian, tell us, will we have less accidents? And if so, will there still be a change there when we see less accidents? I think it's an important point that you should make.
Sure. So I'm always thankful for this question because, like I said before, I'm a kind of a yes-sayer, and I see a bright future ahead. So I think in terms of all the lawyers that are translating law into technology, all the engineers who are working on this technology, all the business drivers, the people who are trying to change or to some way optimize public opinion about the technology, I think one of the main goals is to improve safety. And I still think it doesn't make my job reluctant, probably quite the opposite, because one thing we're witnessing at the moment is, and I think that's the aim of all the technology we're introducing, we want to have safer technology, and at the end we want to have less accidents, less personal injury, etc. So when you look at it from a graphical perspective, I was trying to say, look, the overall number of accidents that will go down. I fully believe in that. It will probably never be zero, but it'll go down dramatically over the years, and that's why we're doing this. At the same time, that's where we see a shift in liability and responsibility is. Of course, the more technology we put into those cars, we won't have, hopefully, no drunk drivers anymore, nobody falling asleep, reaction time, you name it, no speeding. But on the other hand, the responsibility of the companies, startups, new market entrants, OEM suppliers, the responsibility of those companies who put this technology in the vehicle, that responsibility responsibility will of course increase. So we take responsibility away from those human drivers that are making all these mistakes, all these errors, these driving errors, but the overall number will go down of accidents, but at the same time, the number of responsible accidents where companies are responsible for causing those accidents, that will rise. Overall go down, but will rise. Back in the old days, it was like, look, the car was fine, you made a driving error. Now it's car made that error, therefore you made that error, therefore you are responsible. Not the driver, not anybody, but you. And I think that is something we need to be aware of. So we all need to contribute to getting this number down, but at the same time prepare ourselves for facing this responsibility now, because it'll be up on the industry increasingly.
So, but the good news for us as consumers is that it will go down. Now, we're almost finished with this panel. Any questions, any comments from the audience? Oh yeah, there's a question from you here. Officially from policy. Do I have to go or no?
Not so much a question, but a comment. So thank you very much for a very interesting discussion where you touched upon many important issues. I'd like to bring in an additional aspect that I think we should especially consider when we talk about cities. As you rightly mentioned, it's an inherently complex environment with many unwritten rules that are hard to interpret by a machine. But also I think it's very important to make our city authorities aware that they need to set the rules of the game today for what might be arriving tomorrow, and that they need to think very carefully about which use cases they want to allow for automation. If we are going to open our city doors to the automated car as we did to the conventional car, then I don't think we will be solving many problems. So we'll also have to think about the ecosystem as a whole, and not just start from the technology optimism bias, but also from the policy perspective and objectives that we have in terms of reallocating space away from the car, also the automated car, in favor of active travel, in favor of cities for people. And this is something I think we also need to factor into the discussion, because depending on how we frame automation, it might also lead to more problems. For example, more urban sprawl, more kilometers driven, because people will be perceiving travel time differently. They might be having their hair done, their nails done, because they don't have to drive anymore. So these are things we also have to take into account when we talk about this topic.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is so important. You know why? You know what? I do think that the biggest discussion when we introduce these vehicles will be on this third level, the ODD and the municipal level. And that's exactly your point, because then the cities will come into play and they will also have an idea about, you know, why they should be introduced, where they should be introduced, and this is basically the point you are making. So I'm not so concerned about the technology and the approval of the technology on the type approval level. I'm more concerned about the municipal level and then the city level when these cars are being introduced or vehicles. So that's a great point. Another. Yeah. You tell us, you're the master. We need to stop.
Yeah. Actually, two questions. So first one, you said initially that the sort of legal framework will be there by the end of the year. Does it also account for just level 4, but also level 5? So will we have the level 5 legal framework already in place? And secondly, does it account for solving these moral issues? This is famous or infamous experiment called the moral machine by MIT experiments. Guys where basically the car has to choose, will I kill the elderly lady or will I kill the baby? Because I only have those options. You can run those options on various levels, but doesn't a legal framework account for such options or decisions and situations?
Are you a futurist? No. Yeah, it's like you are looking very, very ahead with your question. No, which is great. I don't think that there is any company out there that is currently looking into L5. I mean, even the then CEO of Waymo said there will be no L5 because that's like ignoring any ODD. It will not happen, I think. The other question, I don't know who wants to take it, the ethical one.
Take the ethical one if you want.
Yeah, if you want, it's okay.
All those ethical mind models and experiments, and you all know the trolley dilemma and the first and the second and the 10th modification of it, there's been, you probably know this, in Germany particularly, there have been committees gathering together, not just with lawyers, but also with priests, and you name it, politicians, everybody was in there. They all have an opinion. Volker, correct me if I'm wrong, you're very close to a lot of engineers as well. I don't see any of these cars yet being, you know, with a certain level of certainty able to distinguish an elderly woman from a much younger woman or a child, or I think it is in human nature to have these conversations. We had it in the US, we had it in China, we had it in Japan. In Japan we learned, hey, people are super happy to sacrifice themselves to save their neighbor. Whereas in Germany people are rather like, nah, if I buy a 200,000 euro car that would sacrifice my kids on the back seat over an elderly woman or what, nah, rather not. Like, I want a car that protects myself. It's one of those complex issues because I think human nature is extremely complex, and you talk to politicians, you talk to priests, you talk to lawyers. I think we're light years away from being able to answer that question. I think the good news is, so is the technology. So if anybody in this room has the technology that can clearly support the data to make this question, I think then we might end up in this situation. But I must say, I'm not seeing it. And the technology I'm seeing at the moment is telling the car, look, don't do something too stupid. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, what the engineers tell me is, rule number one is we want to prevent accidents as good as we can. And when we cannot prevent them, we try to optimize our crash situation. In terms of we brake as strong as we can, we try to do as little crazy things as possible. But I'm not aware of a single technology, even remotely available, that could say, the trolley dilemma, if I go left, I cause less harm, whatever that means, instead of going right. It's really tricky. So again, to Patrick's point, I think you're on the right track from a futuristic perspective, but although everybody discusses about it because it drives us as humans, I'm not seeing it as the legal relevant factor. And again, I think I'm still not seeing myself in a courtroom trying to tell a judge that our technology sort of sacrificed the baby over the old lady. I'm not seeing myself there. Or a public prosecutor putting me into jail because the engineers were not having the answer to solving this ethical riddle. Because, again, maybe it's not so much about, and that would be my closing argument, not about so much doing the best right thing, but at least not doing the wrong thing. And, you know I'm trying to go with it. There might be a handful of possibilities where a court would say, okay, that was all right. You just didn't do something too stupid with the car, where a court would say, well, that was clearly wrong. You can't just deliberately go and hit, try to slow down, try to optimize the crash as good as you can, and what happens, you know.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you. Volker wanted to add something, but I got a lot of red cards now from our master, rightfully so. So thank you so much, Volker and Sebastian, and certainly also for your patience and attention. And now over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you. So folks, I'm sure the conversation around this topic will carry on during the coffee break later on today. And I'm delighted to say, linked up to this topic of autonomous vehicles, that it's a save the date time, because on the 12th of October this year, you're going to go to London. And you want to go to London because the London City Summit for Autonomy is taking place, okay? So save the date, 12th of October, and that'll be together with London and partners. And if you're interested in getting involved in that, do talk to the Autonomy team today on